Hello, I am Tammy Marshall, and today I would like to share with you some information about myself. Um, Over the past year, I've made quite a few appearances at libraries and book events, and when I give a reading, I also tend to share my writing journey. Many have found it interesting, so I thought I would share it here too. So I left teaching after 30 years to focus solely on writing. Writing was always my dream, but for a variety of reasons that I won't really get into here, I went down that teaching path. I didn't plan to stay on it as long as I did, but life works that way, doesn't it? I'm finally doing what I always wanted to do on a full time basis instead of squeezing it in whenever I could, which, you know, wasn't very often considering the load I carried while teaching. And, whoever thinks that since teachers have summers off, that I could have just written then doesn't really know what he's talking about. Even with the rare 3 or 4 weeks of total freedom that I had some summers, that wouldn't have sufficed to do the amount and quality of writing that I wanted to do. Now I have the time and the drive to write exclusively, and I'm just loving it. Since leaving teaching last May for good, I've written many feature articles for a newspaper. I've written and submitted more columns for that same newspaper and got another newspaper in a different state to take the column on as well. I've written posts for my 2 blogs. I started 2 different subscriber-based newsletters, one that's devoted to vocabulary building and one that's devoted to various topics of interest to me, where I can showcase my humor and my fiction and poetry, etc. I've scribbled down a bunch of ideas for future stories or books. I've typed more of the rough draft for what will be book number 5, most likely. And I published 2 more novels, bringing my self-published book total to 4, as you can see here. And I'll talk about those in a minute. I never imagined I'd go down that self-publishing path, actually. Even now, it's not really the path I want to be on, but there are some advantages to doing it this way. But let me tell you how and why I first got into self-publishing. So as I already mentioned, I write a column that comes out twice a month for the Norfolk Daily News out of Norfolk, Nebraska, and the Bristol Herald Courier out of Bristol, Virginia, and Tennessee, because the town of Bristol straddles the state line, so it's technically in Tennessee and Virginia. The column is about books and book-related topics, and it's called Novel Thoughts. There's the one from the Norfolk Daily News, and here's something I copied from online from the Bristol Herald Courier. So about 2 years before starting this column, I joined a committee of people who wanted to start a comedy festival in Norfolk, Nebraska, in honor of Johnny Carson, who grew up there, and he graduated from there also. In fact, I was in the 8th grade when Johnny returned to Norfolk to record his movie Johnny Goes Home. And I got to see him perform magic on the stage of my junior high, because my junior high had been his high school building during the years that he lived there. It was quite a treat. And I've been a lifelong fan of his work, and I still pull up old Johnny Carson clips every now and then to get a good laugh. I dabbled in stand-up comedy for a number of years prior to the start of the comedy festival, and I really wouldn't mind doing it again now that I have, my own life here. But back in 2006 or 2007, when the editor of the Norfolk Daily News asked for people to join a committee to bring comedy to Norfolk, I immediately jumped on board. That first time it was held was 2008, and it was such a phenomenal experience. Anyway, because I'd formed a pretty solid relationship with the editor of the Norfolk paper, I asked to do a couple human interest pieces, and he allowed me to do those. Then I approached him about the possibility of doing a column. I wanted to write something, continuous, to build my writing credentials, to hone my craft, and to start getting myself known as a writer. He was a bit hesitant and asked me what I had in mind, so I pitched him 3 ideas. One was a humorous column about parenting and teaching, which I was, very involved with at that point. Well, the second one was a travel column because I love to travel. And the third was a column about books, especially devoted to the classics or the older quality books that people tend to avoid reading or that people have forgotten about. He really liked the third option, which made me very happy since that was the one I most wanted to write. But I'd secretly feared, that he wouldn't go for it. I love to be proven wrong when the result is something so favorable. I started writing that column in 2009, and it's still running strong. My initial hope had been that I'd write it for like a couple years before the newspaper got tired of it. But readers have really embraced it, and I've now written over 300 pieces for it. After I'd been writing the column for about 5 years, I then asked the Norfolk editor if he'd consider serializing a novel I'd written years before I began the column, and which was, basically languishing on floppy disks. See, I told you I wrote it a long time ago. I had tried a few times to get agents interested, but I hadn't had any luck, and the main publishers are closed to you without an agent. Since I was a full-time teacher, coach, and mom, it was always so hard to find the time needed to really research and consistently send things out to agents, contests, small publishers, etc. So my efforts, they'd been rather hit and miss. I fully admit that. However, I really believed that the book was pretty darn good for a first novel, but I really wanted to have people read it to see if I was right. The editor was a little skeptical, but the assistant editor agreed to read a few chapters, and then they'd decide from there. So the assistant editor read them, and he liked them. But the editor didn't want to devote, all that space and ink to printing the novel chapter by chapter in the newspaper. So instead, he opted to run a chapter a week on the online edition. Now it was my turn to be skeptical because, it was going to take an entire year for the Clearwater House to be fully published at a chapter a week. I doubted readers would go for that, but the editor insisted. I was just thrilled that my book was going to be seen and read. And as it was, he knew what he was doing because it did take a while, for people to catch on that there was a book available on the newspaper's website. And over that year, many people read it and liked it and reached out to me asking where they could get a copy. Some readers even called me or stopped me on the street to ask me, what happens next? With those kind of reactions, I knew my book was good. After the year was up, I went ahead and I put it on the Kindle platform because it's a simple process to upload a book there. It doesn't take any special formatting for the most part. I only had to design a cover. A few people did buy the ebook edition of it, but others really wanted an actual physical book. I totally understand that because I seldom do any ebook reading myself. I much prefer to hold a book and turn the pages. So I sat down at the computer one night and I spent a long time figuring things out, but I finally managed to format the Clearwater House to run as a paperback. And I made a different cover that I liked better than the one I had quickly created for the ebook. Now, there are things I would do differently with it if I could go back, and maybe someday I'll reformat it or resubmit it. But overall, I've been very pleased with how it turned out and the reception it has received. Most people who have read it have enjoyed it. That's all I want, for people to read my books and enjoy them. So, 3.5 years ago, in September of 2018, my best friend since college, Amy Vochuk-Barron, passed away from cancer. She was only 50 years old, and she was the sweetest person I've ever known. She was a huge champion in my writing, and she'd personally bought and given as a gift numerous copies of the Clearwater House. During the 1.5 that she was battling and losing her fight to cancer, I sent her daily pick-me-up notes to provide, whatever cheer I could to her from afar. I was in Nebraska. She was living in Dallas, Texas. Near Dallas. When I knew the end was near, I made her a promise in one of my final notes to her that my next book would be dedicated to her. My first book was dedicated to my 2 children. A couple months after her death, that promise, it was weighing heavily upon me because I really had no idea when I'd ever have another full long novel done. I had many in the works, and even complete, including Ticker Tape, which I'll talk about. But since I was also bogged down with teaching responsibilities, I knew it would be a long time before I could get the editing done or finish writing the others I'd begun. So I decided instead to take a novella, a lengthy short story, and 2 short stories that had won writing prizes and compile them into a collection in her honor. Those pieces were done and just sitting around waiting for me to do something with them. They are all feel-good pieces. And I realized that the best way for me to honor my friend, who always made me feel good, was to dedicate 4 feel-good stories to her. Thus, State of Georgia and Other Writings was born. I also included 4 of my poems. Yep, I write poetry too. To sort of introduce the theme of each story. The state of Georgia is not the physical southern state, but rather it is the emotional and mental state in which the protagonist, Georgia, finds herself after her husband's sudden and unexpected death. The stories in this book are all about those, second chances at life that too many people fail to take. And I'm a very big believer in grabbing those. Georgia takes hers, and the protagonist of the longer short story, which is a story called Quitter, he makes his second chance. The cover photo on this story collection was taken by my dear uncle Paul Felsinger, a professional photographer who graciously gave it to me to use after I asked him if he had any sunset or sky photo with shades of blues and pinks in it, because those were Amy's favorite colors, hence the color scheme of the cover. Paul died October of 2020 from a lung infection exacerbated by COVID-19. This book cover is very special to me. Paul also took my author headshot for me 3 years ago. It will take a while before I'm ready to update it, simply because of how special it is to me as a reminder of him. I also used one of Paul's photos inside Ticker Tape. It's at the very end of the book. And it's of United States flag. I put it there to accompany a poem that I also included. It's a patriotic poem that I have dedicated to the memory of my boyfriend Kim's son, Trevor Erickson, who died by suicide 2 years ago, and he was active in the Air Force and suffered from PTSD. The cover art was done by my niece, Paige Wright, and then I colorized it to coordinate with the patriotic color scheme. Ticker Tape is about a broken Vietnam veteran who returns to Vietnam to heal himself emotionally, physically, and spiritually. The entire book came from the first line, which popped into my head one day while I was proctoring the 7th graders during a standardized test. Confetti rained down upon him. I wrote the line down. It stuck with me. So I researched ticker tape parades in New York City and discovered that there was one for the Vietnam War veterans in May of 1985. And from that, Marvin Wineski of Boise, Idaho sprang into my mind, fully formed, and the story developed from there. I had it fully written when I left teaching, but it needed all those final, that final TLC that goes into preparing a book for publication. So that was my first goal. I published Ticker Tape in September of 2021. Then I turned my attention to giving my 4th novel its final TLC. It too was written, but it needed all those final touches. I also had and still have other novels in the works, as well as numerous ideas for others, so I really wanted to get Twinges done. I used another of Paul's photos for the cover in honor of his memory. Twinges is about an elementary teacher who can sense things about her students. She doubts their veracity, but one day she learns that her power is real. She is very concerned because her most recent twinge told her that her young student was going to grow up to be a serial killer. I released that book at the end of 2021. I considered holding it until this year, but I had many readers asking for its release since they knew I was working on it. This is dedicated to all my past students, and ticker tape is dedicated to my parents. My father, Ron Marshall, was an Air Force veteran. He served for 20 years. My mother, Lois Marshall, and this is also dedicated to the memory of my Uncle Paul. I have many projects in the works, but I'm focusing right now on completing the mystery soft thriller set on Tybee Island that I began writing 3 years ago, tentatively titled Trouble on Tybee. I'm determined to be the writer I always wanted to be and to publish many books. I'm also busy writing my column, my newsletters, my blogs, articles, visiting libraries and other book events to promote my books to readers, and just anything I can do every single day. While I would prefer to get a major book deal and get published by a big name publisher, there are some things about the self-publishing route that I really like, but there are definite downsides to self-publishing. One of the big ones is that, I'm in this alone. Even though that's also a positive, because I really like being my own boss and I'm very self-motivated. Another disadvantage is my book won't be found on the shelves of the big chain bookstores like Barnes & Noble. But independent bookstores can stock it. So if you happen to be a proponent of indie bookstores, as I am, please just go to your favorite one and order my books from them. Give them the business. I will get a very tiny royalty from that sale, but I will be thrilled to know that you are helping an independent bookstore thrive. We need them. Another major downside is that I don't have a marketing team behind me. As I said, I'm in this alone. So I will never really sell the number of books I could through a traditional publisher, but I can and will continue to promote all my books. Not just the newest. Every time I make an author appearance at a library, or every time I post on my author website or social media sites, and word of mouth and personal. If you were to like my book and support and tell other people about it, those are the best ways really to promote my work. So for now, I am content to self-publish, but I do want an agent and a book deal. So I'll be starting that search in earnest as soon as I have finished that draft, the final draft of my Tybee novel. So fingers crossed. If you are interested in my books or other writings, and you want to follow my journey online, I do have a Facebook page. I have an author site on Instagram, and I recently joined Twitter. And I have those, and I will put a link for my website. I will put all those links and stuff in the comment section below this video. So for now, I just want to say, thank you for listening to me. If you do visit my website, you will find links to my Amazon page. You can read some more of my columns. There are links to my blogs, my newsletters. You can see where I've appeared and where I will be appearing. You can even contact me via my website. So again, thank you for listening to me. I certainly hope you will consider buying my books. And you can view me reading pieces of those books on my YouTube channel. So please consider viewing more of them and subscribing to know when I post more. Thanks.